You might be one of the millions of people out there who feel completely drained after receiving even the smallest amount of praise. The phrase, "you're doing a great job," suddenly sounds like nails on a chalkboard, making you feel like you're going to crawl under a rock and hide. But why does this happen? Why do some people feel like they're going to burst into flames the moment someone acknowledges their achievement? According to psychologists, it all comes down to a little-known phenomenon called the imposter syndrome. It's a feeling of inadequacy that makes you question your own abilities and accomplishments, even when the rest of the world is telling you otherwise. But here's where it gets crazy. People experiencing imposter syndrome often have a hard time receiving positive feedback from others. They might downplay their achievements or attribute them to luck rather than their own hard work. And if you think that's wild, just wait until you hear this next part. Research suggests that imposter syndrome is not just limited to high-achieving individuals, but can affect anyone, regardless of their background or intelligence. So what's going on here? Why do some people feel like they're frauds the moment they receive any kind of praise? Honestly, this blew my mind when I first learned about it. The answer lies in our brain's attempt to regulate our self-esteem. See, when we receive positive feedback, our brains release a flood of dopamine, which makes us feel good about ourselves. But according to psychologists, this feedback can also create a sense of vulnerability, making us feel like we're one wrong move away from being exposed as a fake. But what if I told you that receiving praise is not just about feeling good about yourself? Research suggests that it's also about feeling seen and understood by others. And if you think that's a simple enough concept, just wait until you hear this next part. Studies have shown that people who feel like they're being seen and heard by others are more likely to experience feelings of connection and belonging. So it's not just about feeling good about yourself, but about feeling like you're a part of something bigger than yourself. Now, I know, crazy, right? We're basically talking about the difference between being seen and being invisible. But what does this have to do with us in real life? The answer lies in the way we communicate with each other. When we praise someone, we're not just giving them a compliment, we're also giving them a sense of validation and belonging. And that's not even the most surprising thing. Research suggests that people who experience imposter syndrome are more likely to engage in self-sabotaging behaviors, such as procrastination or self-doubt. So it's not just about feeling uncomfortable receiving praise, but about feeling like you're not good enough to succeed in the first place. But what happened next changed everything. When I started to understand this concept, I began to see it everywhere. In the way my friends and family reacted to compliments, in the way my colleagues responded to positive feedback, and even in the way I reacted to my own accomplishments. It was like a light bulb went off in my head, and suddenly everything made sense. You won't believe the reason why you hate taking compliments. Deep down, most of us know it's good to receive praise and appreciation. It makes us feel seen, heard, and acknowledged by others, but there's something inside many of us that rebels against this natural high. It's the instinct to deflect or diminish praise, to somehow undo the positive attention, and honestly, it's so darn uncomfortable. Imagine being handed a bouquet of flowers, and instead of beaming with joy, you squirm in your seat and downplay the gesture. Or picture yourself being commended for a job well done, only to interrupt with self-doubt. It's as if you're allergic to recognition, and it makes you feel like an imposter. Researchers now call this the imposter syndrome, a phenomenon where people feel like they're pretending to be someone they're not. It's a self-perpetuating cycle where the desire for self-esteem is met with fear of being exposed as a fake. Our brains are wired to recognize when we're receiving praise we don't think we deserve, and this triggers a strong defensive response. But here's where it gets crazy. Research suggests that this imposter syndrome is not just the result of personal issues or low self-esteem. It's a fundamental aspect of human psychology, rooted in the need for self-protection and social acceptance. Our brains are designed to avoid feelings of shame and inadequacy, even if it means sacrificing the pleasure of receiving genuine recognition. Think about it. When we're praised, our brain gets a rush of dopamine, a pleasurable chemical release that reinforces social connections. However, this also puts us in a vulnerable position. If we don't believe we're worthy of the praise, we'll quickly deflect it or sabotage the situation. It's almost as if we're trying to protect ourselves from the very thing we crave, attention and validation. Now, I'll admit this epiphany was a tough pill to swallow. I'd always thought of imposter syndrome as a personal failing, something to be overcome through sheer willpower. But the truth is, it's a natural response to the way our brains are wired. And that understanding alone has been a weight off my shoulders. But let's not stop there. What if we told you that there's a way to overcome imposter syndrome and genuinely receive praise without feeling uncomfortable? The science suggests it comes down to a deep sense of self-awareness and social connection. When we feel seen and understood by others, we're more likely to accept and enjoy praise. And that's the thing, we often focus on the "I'm not good enough" part of imposter syndrome, but we forget the "I deserve recognition" part. What if we started to believe in our own worth, not just as a means to an end, but as an inherent part of who we are? Are you tired of feeling like a total fake when someone gives you a compliment? Maybe you've even started to wonder if you're the only one who feels this way. You're not alone if you're prone to feeling like an imposter when praised by others. Imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomenon that affects millions of people worldwide, but here's where it gets crazy. Research has shown that up to 70% of high-achieving individuals experience imposter feelings, and the numbers are just as staggering for people in creative fields. So, what's behind this feeling of being a total phony? The truth is, it's rooted in human psychology. You see, when we receive praise, our brain is wired to respond with feelings of shame and inadequacy. Think about it. Have you ever felt a twinge of guilt when someone compliments you on your work? This is because our primitive brain is designed to scan for potential threats, and praise can be perceived as a threat to our sense of self-worth. But that's not all. Research has also shown that people with imposter syndrome tend to have a higher sense of self-doubt and perfectionism. They're more likely to set unrealistically high standards for themselves and then feel inadequate when they inevitably fall short. If you think that's wild, just wait, because when we put too much pressure on ourselves, we can actually experience a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. What is cognitive dissonance? Simply put, it's the uncomfortable feeling we get when we hold two conflicting ideas at the same time. In the case of imposter syndrome, that conflicting idea might be "I'm a total success" versus "I'm a fake, I don't deserve this praise." Leave a comment if you can relate to this mental struggle. Now, here's the good news: overcoming imposter syndrome is possible. It requires a deep sense of self-awareness and social connection, and it's time to talk about one of the most powerful ways to develop both. But before we dive into that, let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, when we're praised by someone we respect, it feels more real? Maybe it's because their opinion matters more to us, or maybe it's because we can see ourselves in their eyes. Honestly, this blew my mind when I realized it, but research has shown that our self-concept is highly influenced by how others see us. This means that if we can develop healthy relationships with people who genuinely support and believe in us, we can start to silence the imposter voice in our heads. So, what's the key to developing this kind of support network? It's simple, but it takes practice. Imagine if you could surround yourself with people who saw your strengths and weaknesses with equal clarity. The good news is, you can create this kind of reality by simply being honest about your fears and doubts with others. Stay tuned for part 4, where we'll dive into exactly how to cultivate these kinds of relationships and build a support network that will help you overcome imposter syndrome for good. You probably know someone who's always deflecting compliments. No, it was nothing. I was just lucky. I don't do anything special. But have you ever noticed how uncomfortable it makes you feel when someone receives praise? Like, seriously uncomfortable. This reaction is rooted in a psychological phenomenon known as imposter syndrome, and I'm here to tell you exactly why it happens. But first, let's talk about what's really going on when we get praised. You see, praise triggers a deep-seated need for self-protection. It makes us feel like we're being put on the spot, like everyone's eye is on us, and we're not sure how to handle it. Our brain is wired to respond to praise with a mix of emotions, gratitude, yes, but also anxiety and shame. And that's where the imposter syndrome kicks in. Here's the thing: when we're praised, our brain is literally checking for any flaws, any mistakes, any evidence that we're not good enough. It's like our brain is searching for a hidden agenda. Is this person just pretending? Am I just getting lucky? This is what's known as a self-doubt loop, and it's incredibly hard to break. Now, I know what you're thinking, but isn't it normal to feel a little self-conscious when we receive praise? Not if it's debilitating, it's not. Not if it's affecting your sleep, your relationships, your work performance. If you're constantly feeling like a phony, like you don't deserve the praise, then it's time to take a closer look. And here's the good news: overcoming imposter syndrome is possible. But it starts with recognizing the pattern for what it is, a coping mechanism that's protecting us from feelings of shame and inadequacy. Once we acknowledge that, we can start working on building self-awareness and cultivating a support network of people who believe in us. But that's not all. Research has shown that women, particularly high-achieving women, are more likely to experience imposter syndrome. In fact, it's estimated that up to 70% of women experience this phenomenon at some point in their lives. So if you're a woman who's been feeling like an imposter, know that you're not alone, and that's not even the most surprising thing. But here's the thing, what if I told you that even some of the most successful people in the world experience imposter syndrome? Think about it, it's a psychological phenomenon that affects people from all walks of life, regardless of their education, their income, or their profession. But what's really wild is that imposter syndrome is not a disorder, it's a normal response to abnormal praise. So, what do? We learn to reframe our thinking, to shift from a "I'm a phony" to a "I'm capable and deserving" mindset. We start to focus on our strengths rather than our weaknesses. And we surround ourselves with people who believe in us, who encourage us to take risks and celebrate our wins. And that's what's coming up next, the third part of our conversation on imposter syndrome. We're going to dive into the strategies you can use to overcome this phenomenon and start living a more authentic, confident life. So stay tuned and let me know in the comments, what do you think is the biggest obstacle to overcoming imposter syndrome? You won't believe the secret many high-achieving women and successful people keep to themselves, a crippling fear that makes them uncomfortable receiving praise. But here's the catch, it's not just a confidence issue or a personality flaw. It's a psychological phenomenon that affects up to 70% of the population, leaving even the most accomplished individuals feeling like they're just pretending to be something they're not. But what if I told you that this feeling of inadequacy is actually a defense mechanism? A way to protect yourself from the anxiety and shame that comes with being noticed. It's called imposter syndrome, and it's more common than you think. But here's where it gets crazy. Even people who are outwardly confident and successful suffer from this phenomenon. Imagine if you're a top performer in your field, consistently receiving accolades and praise from your colleagues and superiors. But every time someone compliments you, you feel a pang of guilt and self-doubt. You think to yourself, I don't deserve this, or I'm just lucky. This is what it means to feel like an imposter. And honestly, this blew my mind. I've worked with people who are struggling with imposter syndrome, and it's heartbreaking to see them struggle with it. But wait until you hear this next part. Imposter syndrome is not just a personal issue, but a workplace problem. It can lead to sleep deprivation, anxiety attacks, and even burnout. In fact, a recent study found that employees who experience imposter syndrome are more likely to leave their jobs due to feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem. This is not just a psychological issue, but a business concern. Now, you might be thinking, but isn't it normal to feel a little uncomfortable when receiving praise? And yes, it is. But the thing is, people with imposter syndrome experience a full-blown anxiety response when receiving praise. It's not just a feeling of unease, it's a physiological response that can be debilitating. And that's not even the most surprising thing. Research has shown that people with imposter syndrome are more likely to experience anxiety in social situations, even when they're not receiving praise. If you think that's wild, just wait. Imposter syndrome can affect anyone, regardless of their background or qualifications. It's not just for women or minorities, it's for anyone who's ever felt like they don't quite fit in. And look, I'm going to be honest with you, I've struggled with imposter syndrome myself, and it's a hard thing to overcome. But here's the thing, it's not impossible. In the next part of this conversation, we'll explore some strategies to help you overcome imposter syndrome and build confidence in your abilities. We'll talk about how to reframe your self-talk, how to build a support network, and how to develop a growth mindset. So stay tuned and get ready to discover the secret to unlocking your true potential.